You were falling. I caught you. The billionaire CEO tells the black girl who slapped him in front of everyone. She came to that hotel lobby for closure. What she got instead was a public humiliation, a stumble she didn't plan, a slap she didn't think, and a man she didn't know, who caught her, said nothing, and then called her 4 days later to offer her a job. This is the story of Nadia and Jang Tae-san. How it started in a lobby, how it almost didn't happen at all, and how two people who had absolutely no business making sense together did.
The hotel lobby was beautiful. That was the first thing Nadia noticed when she walked in. The kind of beautiful that makes you feel underdressed even when you're not. Marble floors, soft lighting, the smell of something expensive and floral that didn't have a name she knew. She had dressed carefully. Not too much, not too little. She told herself it didn't matter what she wore, that this was just a conversation, that Kylian had said he needed to talk, and she was simply showing up like a reasonable person. She should have turned around the moment she saw the group. He was standing near the far end of the lobby bar, surrounded by people she half recognized. His colleagues, a few friends, 2 women she'd seen on his Instagram in the months after he stopped returning her calls. And right beside him, close enough to be a statement, was a woman Nadia had never seen in person but somehow already knew. Tall, composed, her hand resting on Kylian's arm like she'd been placed there on purpose. Seo Yejin, his new girlfriend, the one the internet had been very happy to tell Nadia about. For a second, Nadia just stood there. Her brain was still catching up. Her feet had already stopped. Then Kylian looked up and smiled, not at her, just in her direction, and said loud enough to carry,
"She actually came."
The group turned, not all at once, one by one, which was worse, like dominoes deciding whether to fall. Some of them looked uncomfortable. Most of them just looked curious. The way people look when something is about to happen that they didn't cause and will not stop. Nadia straightened. She was Ghanaian. Her mother had raised her to stand up straight when she most wanted to fold. And right now that training was the only thing holding her upright. She walked toward him. Not fast, not slow. The way you walk when you know people are watching and you refuse to let them see the walk change.
Kylian,
She said. Just his name. Nothing attached to it. He tilted his head, still with that smile.
"I was starting to think you wouldn't show up."
You said you needed to talk. I did. He glanced at Yejin, then back at Nadia, like the look itself was the point. I wanted to say this in person because I think it's the right thing to do. Nadia, you need to stop coming around. People are starting to feel sorry for you, and I don't think you realize how that looks. Something went very quiet in her chest. She heard someone in the group shift, heard the soft sound of a glass being set down. I haven't come around, she said. Her voice was steady. She was shocked at how steady it was. You called me, because I wanted to close this properly. He reached for Yejin's hand and held it openly. This is real now, and I think we both know it wasn't working before, so there's no reason to make it complicated. She could feel the heat of being watched. All those eyes doing the math on her, adding up what kind of woman gets called to a hotel lobby to be publicly corrected by a man who stopped loving her and found someone thinner, lighter, softer, more convenient. She nodded once. She picked up her bag. She turned. Yejin moved at the same moment, maybe accidentally, maybe not, and her shoulder caught Nadia's with enough force that Nadia stumbled. Not a fall, not quite, but a stumble. The kind that makes a sound. The kind people see. Her heel caught the edge of the floor tile, and then there was nothing solid under her at all. 2 hands caught her from behind. Firm. Immediate. One on her waist, one, landing somewhere it wasn't supposed to. Pure instinct. That was all. She spun around and her hand was already moving before she saw a face, before she saw anything, and the sound of the slap was louder than she expected it to be. The entire lobby seemed to contract around it. Then she saw him. He wasn't reacting the way people react when they get slapped. He wasn't raising his hand or stepping back or raising his voice. He was just looking at her. Still, eyes dark and completely level, like he had time to spare and nowhere more important to be. He was tall, dressed in a dark suit that didn't need to announce itself. The kind of still that people learn, not the kind they're born with. Around them, Something had gone wrong with the air. The group at the bar had frozen. Even Kylian had stopped smiling. The man touched his jaw, once briefly, and said,
You were falling. I caught you.
That was all. He held her gaze for one more second. Then he turned and walked away across the marble floor, and the lobby let out a breath it had been holding. Nadia stood there. Her hand was still warm from the impact. She didn't know his name.
Before we go any further, if you've ever watched somebody you trusted turn into a stranger right in front of you, you already know how this part of the story goes. And if you haven't, stay right here, because this is the part that changes everything. Drop where you're watching from. A city, a neighborhood, a street corner. Just let us know you're here. This channel was made for people who actually feel these stories.
She found out that night. She sat on the floor of her apartment in Seoul with her back against the couch and her phone in her hand, and she searched. Man at Grand Lux Hotel Seoul, dark suit, tall, lobby incident, February. It took 11 minutes and 3 different search paths before she got to a face. And when she did, something in her stomach dropped completely through the floor. Jang Tae-san, founder and CEO of JT Holdings. 41 years old. One of the most powerful private names in South Korea. The kind of man who got a full paragraph before his company name even appeared. The kind of man whose photograph newspapers paid money for because he rarely allowed them. She had slapped him. In a hotel lobby. In front of witnesses. She put her phone face down on the carpet and stared at the ceiling for a long time. Then she picked it up again and kept reading, because if she was going to be destroyed by this, she wanted to at least understand what had destroyed her. For days passed. She went to work. She drafted a media strategy for a cosmetics brand launch. She answered emails. She did not sleep well. Every time her phone rang with an unknown number, something cold moved through her, and every time it turned out to be nothing, she was relieved and disappointed in equal measure, which didn't make sense. On the 5th morning, her phone rang at 8:14. Unknown number. Seoul area code. She answered it. Miss Oseboteng. The voice was even, unhurried, like he had made this call from a place of complete certainty and was simply waiting for her to arrive. This is Jang Tae-san. She sat down. She wasn't near a chair. She just sat down on the floor of her kitchen. I've reviewed the security footage from the Grand Lux, he said. I understand what happened. She said nothing. Her brain was calculating exits and finding none. I'm not calling to pursue the matter, he said. I'm calling because I have a proposal. A proposal. You're a communications specialist. Your work history is strong. I've been looking for an external consultant for 6 weeks. Someone without ties to my existing structure. A pause that felt very intentional. I'd like that person to be you. Nadia looked at the wall across from her. It was a very ordinary wall. She focused on it. You watched security footage of me, she said slowly, and your response was to offer me a job. My response was to understand context. The voice didn't change. The footage showed everything. I understand what you walked into that lobby facing. Another pause. The job is real. The offer is separate from what happened. You can say no. She was quiet for a moment. What kind of communications work? She asked. She said yes. She told herself she was being strategic. She told herself it was the opportunity, not him. Not the way he'd looked at her in the lobby, like she was someone worth looking at carefully. Not the fact that he had watched the whole thing and called her anyway. She told herself a lot of things in the first 2 weeks. The office of JT Holdings occupied 4 floors of a building in Uedo that cost more per square meter than most people made in a year. She had her own workspace, a dedicated point of contact, and access to every department file her role required. It was structured precisely enough that she couldn't find anything to complain about, which was almost suspicious. The first time Tae-san called her into his office for a working session, she wore her best blazer and took notes on a legal pad because she didn't trust herself not to say something strange if her hands weren't occupied. He talked about the company's public communications problem in clean, factual terms. No drama. No inflated language. He laid out what wasn't working and what he wanted to change, and then he stopped talking and looked at her. Your assessment, he said. She had won. She'd done 3 days of research before walking into that building. Your problem isn't messaging, she said. Your problem is that your messaging is correct, and that's exactly what's wrong with it. Everything JT Holdings releases sounds like it was written by someone who has never made a mistake and doesn't think they need to. People don't trust perfect. They trust honest. He looked at her for a moment. Go on, he said. She went on. The first real test came 2 weeks in, during a meeting with 3 senior executives who had been at JT Holdings longer than Nadia had been in South Korea. They were polite to her. Very polite. The kind of polite that has a bottom layer of something else entirely. She put a revised communications framework on the table. One of the executives, a man named Director Huang, silver-haired and careful, said with the same politeness that the approach was interesting but perhaps too aggressive for JT Holdings' existing brand position. She started to explain her reasoning. Director Huang spoke over her. Gently, regretfully, the way powerful men speak over women when they want to make it sound accidental. She stopped. Tae-san said from the other end of the table, Huang Isai. Let her finish. It wasn't loud. It wasn't aggressive. But Director Huang stopped talking immediately, and the room shifted, and everyone in it felt the shift, and Nadia kept speaking. After the meeting, no one mentioned it, but she noticed. She noticed a lot of things. The way he backed her judgment not once but consistently. Publicly, in meetings where it would have been easier to stay neutral. The way he listened when she talked about a strategy, not with the performative nodding of a man pretending to listen, but with the actual stillness of someone processing. The way he remembered specifics. 3 weeks into the job, he referenced a detail she'd mentioned in passing about a campaign she'd worked on in Lagos, unprompted, in the middle of an unrelated conversation. She hadn't expected him to remember that. She hadn't expected him to be paying that kind of attention. She told herself it was professional. She was very firm with herself about this. Then Kylian showed up. She was eating lunch in the small cafe near the building's side entrance, alone intentionally because she needed 30 minutes where no one needed anything from her. When she heard her name, she looked up and there he was. Standing in front of her table like this was a thing that could just happen, like he had thought about it and decided it was reasonable. I just want to talk, he said, before she could say anything. He sat down across from her without being invited. I heard you're working at JT Holdings now. That's not a secret. Nadia. He dropped his voice to the tone she used to find sincere. I know how things ended. I know I could have handled it better. She set down her fork. She looked at him with the same directness she'd been practicing for 6 years in boardrooms, where being a black woman meant you were always being assessed before you opened your mouth. What do you want? She said. I want another chance. She picked up her fork again. No, I made a mistake. You organized a public humiliation, she said. You called me to a hotel lobby where your girlfriend was waiting, surrounded by people who knew what was about to happen, and you told me people felt sorry for me. She said it without heat. Just the facts in order. That's not a mistake. That's a choice. And I'm not interested in being close enough to you for you to make another one. He opened his mouth. She looked at him steadily. He closed it. He left. She finished her lunch. The second time was worse, because he came to the building. She was walking out of a strategy session, still carrying her notes, when she heard his voice in the corridor. He'd gotten through the lobby somehow, a visitor badge, a confident story, whatever had worked. And he was standing 10 feet from the elevator bank waiting for her like he had a right to be there. She heard him before she saw him, and she slowed down just enough that the person walking behind her didn't notice. Tae-san was beside her. He'd been in the same meeting, the timing was incidental, and she felt him register the hesitation before she said anything. That's my ex, she said quietly. I'll handle it. He nodded once and said nothing. She walked toward Kylian alone. This time, Kylian had come prepared with something different. He wasn't sorry anymore. He was warning. I'm saying this because I actually care about what happens to you, he said. Men like Jang Tae-sen don't. They don't do this with women like you seriously. You understand what I'm saying. This is a situation where you end up with nothing, and he moves on unchanged, and you're the one who has to rebuild. She stood in the corridor of a company that had her name on a contract that she had negotiated herself, in a city she had moved to by choice, doing work she had built the capacity for over a decade. And she looked at this man who had once made her feel small for loving him, and she felt nothing she hadn't expected to feel. "Women like me," she said. He had the sense to look slightly uncomfortable. "I know exactly what you mean," she said. "And I want you to think very carefully about the fact that you came here, to my workplace, to say that to me. Because I think somewhere in there you believe you're helping. And I think that's the most honest thing you've said to me in a long time." She tilted her head slightly. "Don't come back." She turned around. Tae-san was standing at the elevator, looking at his phone. He may have seen everything. She didn't ask. He didn't offer. He pressed the button and held the door for her, and they rode up in silence. The next morning he called her into his office before the day properly started. "Yesterday," he said. She waited. "I didn't say anything because it was clear you didn't need me to." He said it without ceremony, like he was reporting a fact. "But I want to say what he said to you. He was wrong." She was quiet for a moment. The morning light was coming through the window behind him, and she was looking at the desk. "I know," she said. "Good." He nodded once. "That's all." She stood to leave. "Nadia," he said. She turned back. He looked at her for a second. Just a second. Like something was happening behind his expression that he decided not to say yet. "Good work this week," he said. She went back to her office and sat at her desk and stared at her screen for 4 minutes before she could think clearly again. The elevator was a Thursday. The meeting before it had lasted 2 hours and 40 minutes, and Tae-san had backed her publicly against 2 investors who had come in skeptical and left converted, and she had walked out feeling the particular aliveness that comes from doing your job exactly right when it mattered most. They stepped into the elevator together. The doors closed. In the silence, something shifted. Not dramatically. Not with music. Just, the space got smaller, or her awareness of him in the space got larger, which was functionally the same thing. He was looking straight ahead. So was she. "You were very good in there," he said. "You made it easier," she said. "The way you positioned the framework before I spoke, I could build from that." That was intentional. She turned to look at him. He was already looking at her. The doors didn't open. She wasn't sure who moved first. Maybe neither of them moved, and the space simply closed between them the way water fills a shape. His hand came up to the side of her jaw, light enough that she could have stepped back, and she didn't step back, and he kissed her, steady and quiet, like something he'd already thought through. She kissed him back. Then she put her hand on his chest and stepped back. The doors opened. Different floor, wrong floor. Neither of them said anything. She got out. She needed air. She got air. She pulled back after that. Not from the job. She wasn't that kind of scared. But from him. She kept meetings professional. She answered his messages about work immediately, and the other ones more slowly. She told herself she was being careful. She was being careful. She'd learned what happened when she wasn't. He didn't push. He didn't pull back either. He was just there. Consistent. The same quality of attention. The same steadiness. Unbothered by her caution in a way that should have seemed indifferent, but somehow felt like the opposite of indifferent. It was, she would think later, the most effective thing he could have done. And she was never quite sure if he'd calculated it, or if it was simply who he was. And the uncertainty of that kept her up more than once. The night everything changed started as a late night in the office. She was alone on the 31st floor at 11 p.m., working through an investor presentation for the following week, when she found the first number that didn't add up. She almost moved past it. Finance wasn't her department. But the number connected to a communications budget she'd been working with. And when she pulled the thread, it led to another thread, and another after that. And by 12:30 she was sitting in a very cold office looking at a pattern of financial redirection that added up to something she didn't have a word for except betrayal. The source connected, through 3 layers of documentation, to a name she recognized. Shin Juno, Tae-san's partner. 9 years. The man who had been at his side when JT Holdings was a smaller company with a riskier future and a lot to lose. The man Tae-san spoke about as close to him as anyone professionally. She called Tae-san. He answered on the second ring, even though it was nearly 1 in the morning. "I need you to come to the office," she said. I found something. I need you to see it yourself. He didn't ask her to explain it over the phone. He didn't ask her if she was sure. He said, I'm coming, and arrived in under 30 minutes. She walked him through everything. All of it. Every document, every figure, every trail of redirection she'd followed. She said it clearly and without drama, because she understood that this was not the moment for her to have feelings about what she was presenting. Her job was to lay it out cleanly and let him see it. He sat across from her at the conference table, and he was very still. The kind of still she'd seen on him before, but deeper. Like something inside him had gone offline, and was running on emergency power only. When she finished, he didn't say anything for a long moment. Then he said, How long do you think this has been happening? At least 2 years, she said. Maybe 3. He nodded. He looked at the documents. He looked at his hands. I trust you, he said. Not as a response to anything she'd specifically said. Just, he said it, the way you say something when you suddenly understand that you need to say it out loud. Then he stood. He crossed around the table and he kissed her once, certain brief, like an answer to a question she hadn't asked, and he said, Go home. Sleep. We'll deal with this tomorrow. She went home. She didn't sleep. The unraveling of Shinjuno took most of a month. Legal, financial, strategic. Every layer of it was its own damage, and the personal layer underneath all of it was something Tae-san carried privately. He didn't break visibly. He went to work. He made decisions. He moved through everything that needed moving through. Nadia stayed close without trying to fix anything, because she understood that some things can't be fixed. They can only be witnessed. And what he needed was someone who understood the difference. One night she arrived at his apartment. He'd asked her to come, no specific reason given, and found him standing at the floor-to-ceiling window looking out at the city. He had a glass of water he hadn't touched. He wasn't on his phone. She sat down on the couch. She didn't say anything. She didn't perform comfort at him. She just sat. After a while, he came and sat beside her. After a while longer, they were both asleep. She woke up at 4 a.m. with a crick in her neck and her head on his shoulder. And for a moment she didn't move, just stayed there in the dark, breathing. The fight happened on a Tuesday. She saw the public statement on her phone at 6:47 in the morning, still in pajamas, and she was in a cab to his apartment by 7:15, still in the same pajamas, because some things cannot wait for appropriate clothing. He opened the door before she could knock twice. He was already dressed. He looked at her face, and something that might have been the beginning of a smile appeared very briefly. You should have told me, she said. I made the decision quickly. You made a public statement about the Shin-Juno situation without consulting your communications consultant. She stepped inside. That's what you hired me for. You don't get to manage me out of situations to protect me. I won't be handled like that. I wasn't trying to handle you. Then what were you doing? I was trying to keep you out of something that could affect your professional reputation if it went badly. He said it evenly. Not defensive, not apologetic. Just honest. That's my risk to take, she said. Not yours to remove without asking me. She crossed her arms. I need you to understand this. I love you. And loving you means I will not be on the outside of decisions that affect us both. It landed in the room. She heard herself. She had not planned to say it. It had simply become true at some point, and apparently this was when it chose to come out. He walked across the kitchen toward her. Unhurried. He stood in front of her and looked at her the way he'd looked at her in that lobby. Carefully, like she was worth the time. I love you, he said. Like it had been in him for a long time, and he'd simply been waiting for the right sentence to attach it to. She looked at him. We're still having this argument, she said. I know, he said. I'll do better. You will, she said. I'll make sure of it. He almost smiled at that. She almost smiled back. What came after was not quiet, and it was not perfect. She started her own firm, Osei Communications, her name first. And it grew faster than she'd expected because she was very good, and because the JT Holdings account gave her credibility that opened doors. Tae-san was careful to keep the professional relationship clean and documented, because he understood optics, and because she'd told him once that she needed to earn this herself, and he'd heard her completely. Her mother came to visit in the fall. A woman who had raised Nadia to stand up straight when she most wanted to fold, who had opinions about men and expressed them through the quality of her silences. She watched Tae-san for 3 days. He cooked for her once, listened to her twice, and did not try to win her over. He just behaved like himself. On the 3rd day, her mother found Nadia alone in the kitchen and said, "He looks at you the way your father looked at me. Like he's paying attention." Her mother didn't say much more than that. She didn't need to. The proposal happened on a midnight flight home from Tokyo, somewhere over the East Sea. No one else around them was awake. The cabin was dim and quiet. They'd been talking and then not talking, the comfortable version of quiet that takes time to build. He reached into his jacket pocket. He passed a small box across the armrest between them. No ceremony, no speech, just the box and then his eyes on her face. She looked at it. She looked at him. "You're doing this on a plane," she said. "You're not the kind of person who needs a restaurant," he said. She picked up the box. Inside was a ring that was exactly the kind of ring she would have chosen if anyone had ever thought to ask her. "Ask me properly," she said. "Will you marry me?" he said. Not like a question, like something that had been decided already in some other place, and this was just the paperwork. She looked at him across the dark space between the seats. This man who had caught her when she was falling and let her slap him for it, and then called her 5 days later and offered her something better than an apology. This man who had backed her in every room that mattered and sat beside her in the dark when neither of them had anything to say. "Yes," she said. She put the ring on herself. He watched her do it. Outside the window, there was nothing but the dark and the altitude and the East Sea somewhere below, and they were just 2 people in an airplane flying through it together. That is how this story ends. Not with a party, not with a speech. Just 2 people in the dark, heading somewhere, having decided that they were going there together. Ordinary and enormous all at once. And that's where we leave them. Thank you for being here for this one. We mean that. Some of you have been with this channel since the beginning, and some of you found us 10 minutes ago. And either way, we're glad you stayed. Now we want to know who was right, who was wrong. Did Tae-sen go too far, not far enough, or exactly far enough? What moment hit hardest for you? Was it the lobby? The elevator? The fight in the kitchen? The airplane? Tell us. Share this with someone who would feel it. Bring them here. And until next time, from Seoul to the Sahara, where every love story is worth the distance.